Hello and welcome to the garden. It's the middle of April, sky's blue, the sun is shining, and next door's cherry tree is absolutely covered in bees. You can hear them humming away. It's even just about warm enough for Max to come out and say hello. But the downside of all these clear, fine days has been some very cold nights. And although it's the middle of April, we've had nights down to -3, even -4 degrees, which, although it's not cold enough to bother the palm trees and anything really hardy, it's very frustrating as it can just nip at that new growth, especially on the trees like the acers, the Japanese maples, the gunnera, the tetrapanax. So it's been a case of having to fleece over what I can, although ultimately a bit of fleece can't protect these plants, the new growth especially, from a really hard frost. So I've done the best I can. Max has already decided that he's got bored and he's gone rummaging in the undergrowth somewhere. Unfortunately, whilst he's the star of the show, he demands a lot of chicken for his time. And obviously today I've just not paid him enough, so that's it, he's gone. But today's video is actually about something exciting, 2 new additions to the garden. And now, before you say it, I am still on a very limited budget for this year's summer display. There's still the wedding next month and there's still a lot of hard landscaping to be done. But these 2 purchases, well, I'll tell you how I'm justifying them in my head anyway. The first one, it didn't cost a lot of money. It's a plant that was around £10 plus the postage on top. It's actually related to a very common exotic plant you see in a lot of front gardens around the country, but it's a slightly more unusual variant that can be quite hard to track down. It's one that I am growing from seed, but I also wanted to try a slightly larger plant so I can get it out in the ground this spring and see if my garden offers it the right conditions it needs to thrive. If you've been interested in exotic gardening a while and you really know your plants, then if I said that the first plant is well known for being temperamental and very picky about where it chooses to grow at all, then that might give it away. It's this, a Cordyline Indivisa. Now, you might be familiar with Cordyline australis, which is a very common, it looks very similar to this. They quickly form a nice tall trunk, lovely rosetta green leaves at the top. They're very tough plants, very hardy, they don't need a lot of care, and although bad winters can chop them down, they often resprout from the trunk and they're actually a plant that's very hard to kill. Now, Cordyline Indivisa is the exact opposite, and it's a plant that for many people doesn't even want to live in the first place. And I think whilst the australis it's very adaptable, it can grow a lot of different conditions. They can cope with dry, with sun, with shade, with moist soil. The Indivisa, just going off the sort of places where I've seen it growing well, there's a few botanic gardens where it grows, it seems to need a cooler spot, a shadier spot, maybe a bit more shelter. So hopefully in the garden that we've got here, there's this large cherry tree overhanging this part of the garden. I'm hoping to find a spot around the gunneras where this might just be a little bit cooler, it might have more consistent temperatures. Now, there's still a hardy plant, and they're actually potentially even hardier than the standard Cordyline australis, but we'll sort of see about that. I don't really know, to be honest. But it's more about finding the right spot for it. So if I've got somewhere here that's cooler, with lovely moist soil, maybe not moist at the minute, but for most of the year it will be, we'll give it a shot and hopefully it's got a good chance at becoming a large specimen. And for that, it's definitely worth it. So if you look closely, you'll see at the leaves, they've got a lovely orange midrib, which is the middle section. And that's the way to tell the genuine Indivisa from the australis, because unfortunately a lot of plants that are actually sold as Indivisa turn out to be the australis, the basic green version. And whilst there's nothing wrong with them, if you're hunting down an Indivisa, obviously nothing but that will be good enough. They're absolutely fantastic plants, and when they get to a decent size, they look absolutely incredible. The leaves are really wide, a lot wider than the standard australis, probably go up to about 10 centimetres wide, and they look really exotic. They're basically like a huge oversized version of the standard Cordyline. And if you Google pictures of them to see what they're like in the mature sort of sizes, absolutely incredible. And I think it'd be just at home between the tree fern and the gunneras in this cooler, shadier side of the garden. All we need to hope now is that it survives, but I'll try my best. Just for comparison purposes, here's the Cordyline Indivisa, and this is a standard Cordyline australis. Well, there's actually a few special name versions, but essentially they're all the same plant. Maybe some of them have got slight tinges of red to them. But as you can see at this size, they don't look hugely different. But once they get to a few metres tall, if hopefully we do get to that stage, the Indivisa looks dramatically different, with really wide leaves. It's just a plant that's so different to any other exotics that we can grow here in the UK. So I thought it's definitely worth rolling the dice, especially with it being around £10. The second plant for the garden also prefers these shadier, cooler conditions, and it's another tree fern, another Dicksonia Antartica. And whilst I've already got a few, when we were out shopping last week, I saw this one. It's a really chunky specimen, about 4.5 feet tall. So I'll just show you it now. So as you can see, it's currently tucked away safely in the polytunnel, and that's purely because it's already started growing this year's crosias, the fronds that are coming out the top. So the rest of my tree ferns that are already out in the garden, that have been out there all winter, they haven't started sending them out yet. I've had a quick rummage around in the tops, and most of them do seem to have the crosias just starting to unfurl, but it's not a bad thing that they're not already out, because obviously we're having the frost at the minute, and temperatures around freezing or even below are enough to completely blacken these and kill off that new growth, which for tree ferns is really frustrating because it can lead to the crown actually closing up over time, and definitely the plant's not going to look good for a good few months at least. So whilst the other plants, I've just left them to it. They've currently just got a bit of straw in the crowns. That one, because it already started growing, it's presumably been kept somewhere a bit warmer, or with it being a new import, they can get a little bit jet lagged, for want of a better word. I mean, ultimately, these are plants that were growing over in Australia, so literally another hemisphere, that have been put into a shipping container for weeks, months even, and then brought over to the UK. So obviously they've had all the fronds chopped off at the point when they were harvested, and they won't really know where they are, what time it is. They're just going to start growing as a natural response. So if you have bought a tree fern as a bare log, or that's been kept somewhere warmer, then what I would say is until these night frosts have passed, which should hopefully be in the next week or so, we'll see, it was worth keeping them either in a polytunnel, in your greenhouse. If you haven't got either of those, then certainly near your house you can either cover it with some fleece or put it in a garage if there was a really cold night forecast again. So it's in there for a while, but I'm hoping to be able to plant it out in the next week or so. So there's two reasons I got the tree fern, and the main one is just that I like the look of it. It's got a lovely chunky trunk, and I suppose there might be a slight advantage in terms of hardiness to tree ferns with a chunky trunk, purely because there's more material around that growing point. So I guess they might be able to take a few degrees cooler, maybe a degree or so, and they might be able to take a longer freeze without suffering any damage. But the main reason is just that I like the look of that trunk. And whilst I've got quite a few tree ferns in the garden here, I think my favourites, the ones that really speak to me, are the ones with really sort of interesting trunks. So I've got some with wider trunks at the bottom, some curved examples, some with double trunks, and some that are planted at an angle. And I really like the look they bring to the garden. But all tree ferns are fantastic plants. The second reason is I'm actually going to be selling a few of my palms and other exotics over the next month or so on eBay, and I'll probably do another video just looking at the ones I'm selling before I move them on. But the main thinking behind that is, and it might be quite hard to picture if you haven't seen one of my previous tour videos, but as I'm putting the garden together and most of the structural plantings in, a lot of my remaining sort of permanent planting opportunities are in the middle part of the garden, and that's actually quite sheltered. So we've got a few big trees. There's a big poplar, a big cherry tree in the Lelandii next door's garden that actually shade out a lot of that sort of midday light. So in summer they're going to get a lot more shade, which isn't a bad thing. It just means I have to change my planting to reflect the opportunities available. So for me, I've got a lovely spot right next to where the greenhouse is going, and I thought this tree fern would be an absolutely cracking plant for that spot. Most of the palms I'm looking at selling are bouteas, so the plants that need really that full sun, a good warm sheltered spot and good drainage. And what I'm finding is that a lot of my planting spots I've got at the sunny end of the garden, they'll be in a raised bed, so they'll get the full sun, they'll get the drainage, but it's quite an exposed end of the garden, so it would mean a lot more plants that I need to protect every winter, whereas the same plants in someone else's garden, maybe close to a house, where they'll just really absorb a lot of the heat that the walls give out at night, that could be just the right spot. And you might find in a place like that, they won't get any winter damage, whereas at this end of the garden, because it's so cold there and it's a bit of a frost pocket really, they would tend to get a bit of damage and the leaves will start to brown. So what I'm actually doing is selling those. I've decided to go for the tree fern to have at the shadier end of the garden as a bit of a specimen plant, and at the sunny end of the garden that is more exposed, I'm going for really tough plants, so Yucca rostrata, gloriosa. I've got some lovely spiky plants that will go in there that will take a lot more cold than what some of my slightly more tender palms would. So if you're looking at buying a tree fern this year, then firstly, you might struggle to get some, definitely in the larger sizes, from a lot of the usual online suppliers. I got most of mine maybe 4 or 5 years ago from Seagraves, and they were significantly cheaper than they are now. And I don't say that out of smugness, more out of regret that I didn't buy more when they were available. I should have got loads more of the 8-foot size, because they're over double the price now. And I actually got a lot of them on a pre-order, so you got the previous year's prices and on pallet deals, so I didn't pay any shipping. But now, unfortunately, they're considerably more expensive and harder to bring into the country. And I know this year in particular, there's just a lot less of them and a lot more demand. So it's really going to be a case of, rather than sort of shopping around, trying to find out, who's got the right plants in, who's got them in that are the right size for your garden. And the key thing with tree ferns is that you do need to buy the size that you're wanting. So they don't grow very fast. They grow from around 1 to 5 centimetres a year, depending on location and conditions. So ultimately, if you want a 6-foot tree fern, planting a 2-foot tree fern and hoping that time will get there, it's going to take a lot of time. It's probably going to take around 50 years. So in reality, you need to get the size you're actually wanting. And unfortunately, at the minute, with the stock this year, it can just mean searching, Googling it, and places like the Palm Tree Company, I think they had some stock in, but a lot of Seagraves and the other suppliers like that are actually looking already at the back end of summer. So I appreciate that can be a bit frustrating. A bit more about buying tree ferns then, especially if you're new to tropical gardening. So the first thing is, if you're searching for them online, you'll notice that they're actually sold by the foot. So this is a bit of an unusual way of actually buying plants, but it's for a couple of reasons really. Firstly, because they're actually sold as a bare trunk. So in Australia, they're actually chainsawed off at ground level, but because it's not technically a trunk, it's actually made up of rhizome and roots, that trunk, once placed into the ground here in the UK, sends out roots. And this isn't something you're taking a gamble on. They are very reliable. I've not had a single one fail on me, and to be honest with you, I think as long as that trunk hasn't dried out significantly, there's a very, very good chance that it will root, certainly within the first sort of month or so. And it's worth staking them for maybe the first year, but you tend to find after 6 months, especially over winter, they become rock solid, and within a year or two, you're not going to get that plant out unless you've got a lot of digging ahead of you. So first thing is, I wouldn't mind buying them as a bare trunk. They are cheaper that way, and you've got a fresh import into the country, so it's not had time to dry out in a garden centre or some DIY shop somewhere. That's potentially the best way of buying them, and the way that I've got most of mine. Now, the other way of buying them is actually potted. And if you go to garden centres or nurseries, you'll see a lot of their tree ferns are all potted up, and they usually already have the fronds sprouting. So, firstly, you do pay a good bit more for a potted plant, purely because obviously it's been potted, it's been looked after, it's been watered longer. But the upside to that is that you can actually see the exact plant you're getting. So if you want a chunky plant, you can choose one out. And if there's one where maybe the crown looks a bit small in the top, then you can avoid it. So when I say crown, if you look at the top of a tree fern, if you look at the top down, you'll see that around the outside, that's essentially where they chainsaw the top of the tree fern off. So they get rid of all the fronds, basically so they can pack more into a container. But if you look at those, you'll see a lot of the fronds are chopped off, but in the middle, you'll have all the new growth. And hopefully it'll be a really healthy centre, which is packed full of those new croziers, the new fronds, ready to unfurl. Or they might even already be out, especially if you're buying them later in the year. But if that crown looks really small, so if your tree fern sort of trunk is around that size and the crown is only maybe sort of 5 centimetres or so across, then that's not great, because it means really that plant's sort of on its last legs. It doesn't have many fronds, and what you might find over a few years is that it actually starts to close up, because as you chop those fronds off, it really restricts the area that new ones can grow from. So ideally, if you can choose a plant that you're actually going for, just make sure that middle crown, there's plenty of fronds there, and it looks nice and healthy and wide. So the plant that I got, it's not perfect, it is a bit on the small side, but there's still plenty of fronds there, and I'm pretty sure that it will do absolutely fine. I've got quite a mix here in the garden, but it seems that this year there are a lot, or the latest batch that they've imported, do tend to have smaller crowns. So obviously if you're buying them online, it's not something you can see, but you are getting plants for cheaper, and if there's a real issue, I'm sure you can contact the supplier. But if you are buying a tree fern from a garden centre, from a nursery, then I know you are paying a bit more, but it's an advantage. If you can choose a plant that you really like the look of, if it looks nice and healthy, and if you can see the fronds growing while it's there, there's absolutely no risk at all, and it's also ready to plant out into your garden. So you don't have to worry about staking it, you don't have to worry about how dry it's been in transport and really soaking it through. It's just a case of plant it straight onto your garden, keep it moist, All tree ferns like to be kept moist, but you've got that instant impact that you're wanting. So today's video has just been a quick one talking about a couple of new plants I've got in the garden, but that's mainly because I'm saving up a lot of the changes I've made to the garden for the next tour video. And one of the upsides of it actually being quite dry recently has been that the paths have dried out, so I've been able to get a lot more of the rocks and my biggest palm further down the garden. So if you thought the music was dramatic for that Jubea, then brace yourself, because this next one, it's going to be big. But in addition to that palm, I've actually been doing quite a few things, and I've got a lot more planned for this weekend. So the first of those is getting some stone edging put around this jungle clearing area. I've got another Phoenix Canariensis to go. This is actually going to be planted near the shed, so it's a nice sheltered warm spot. It'll have my greenhouse next to it. It'll be sandwiched in nicely. So that was a pan I was going to sell, but I decided that because they grow quickly and because there's quite a few locally that have survived unprotected for the past few years, alright, I'm going to take a chance, and I've got a spot for it which in theory gives it the best advantage it can. So we'll see how that goes. It's a beautiful evening now, just look at that sunlight. So this weekend I've got the Phoenix Canariensis to find a home. I've got the stonework to put around this jungle clearing area. I might plant the tree fern out, or I might just wait. It depends really what the nighttime temperatures look like next week. If there's much sort of below 4 degrees, then I'll probably just keep it in the polytunnel because it's not hurting there. It just means I need to water it a bit more. So the next thing I need to do is to prepare some of the areas where I'm actually planting my summer planting, maybe in a few weeks, but more realistically in either the second week of May or the third week. Again, I'll see what the nighttime temperatures are, and I don't like to plant out any of the sort of tropical summer planting until the nighttime temperatures are pretty consistently at 5 degrees or above. So that's my next main mission, and the other thing I'll be needing to do is actually water a lot of the garden. So it's been that dry recently that I've had to water the tree ferns a few times already, but a lot of the bamboos are starting to shoot now, and plants like the Persicaria that have been cut down by the frost, they'll be ready to grow again. They're absolutely bulletproof, those plants, so the main thing that I can do to help a lot of them out at this stage is give them plenty of water. So it'll take a while, but this weekend I want to give the garden a proper watering and set it up for the next few weeks of hopefully milder spring weather. So in addition to the next jungle tour video, which might be a few weeks or a month away, I'm really excited about it, and I've got some amazing changes in the garden to show you. I've also got a few more videos planned, the first of which is a look at how I put together a tropical border. So using an example of the border at the old house, how I sort of plan it out, and how I'm mixing the summer planting with the more evergreen structural planting that stays out all year. And a few tips that there's not a right way and a wrong way, but just how I generally put a border together to create something that's easy to look after and that will look good all summer long. Another video in the pipeline is a continuation of my UK Tropical Garden Basics series, looking at how to water your exotic or tropical garden. So there's going to be plenty of helpful tips in there, more general tips about watering, when's the best time to do it, how it's best to do it, and then I'm also going to look at different groups of plants. So obviously it's not practical to look at every single plant, but I'd like to give you a few general tips that might help really sort of set you up for watering any kind of plant, and how to really create the conditions that they need to grow well throughout the summer. So that's something I'm looking forward to doing as well. But that's not it, I've got even more videos planned, and I'm going to do a couple looking at the right plants for certain conditions. So how to plant up a sunny garden that's really exposed versus how to plant up a garden that's shady, so you can create completely different exotic looks and the best plants to choose for each of those. I've also got some shorter videos looking at some quick tips that have helped me put together and look after my exotic garden, as well as more in-depth looks at certain kinds of plants, and plants that, whilst they're not readily available in garden centres, I absolutely think they should be, and I wouldn't be without them in my exotic garden. So thanks for watching, thanks to all my subscribers, those that have been here for quite a few months now, and those that are new to the channel. I appreciate all the views, all the subscribes, and all the comments. So thanks for watching again, and I'll see you all soon.